All right, well, welcome to the Redesigning Society series, Geoff.
Well, it's good to be here.
Now, you are an icon in permaculture, and you're the person to speak to for what a real definition of what permaculture is and where it's going. So can you start with a little bit about how you were introduced to permaculture?
Well, I was born in England and I emigrated to Australia in 1979. I was 16 in 1970, so I lived through the 70s and remember some of it. That was a real change era, and there was a lot of dreams about the initial ideas of self-sufficiency, self-reliance and sustainability, although that wasn't a buzzword then, but it was really the theme. And then when I went through school and college and studies, I kind of had to focus on other things, but eventually that dream stayed with me. And when I arrived in Australia, permaculture was just beginning as a design science subject. And that's what it really is. It's a design science that begins with ethics. So you could call it an ethical design science that supplies all the needs of humanity in a way that's beneficial to life on Earth totally, and the environment and biosphere itself. So it pulled together all those old longings that hadn't left. You know, I was still attached to some of those ideologies, but they'd become a little bit distant. And then I arrived in Australia as an English immigrant from an overcrowded small country to this wonderful, large, underpopulated, massive landmass with all its opportunities and the possibility to buy land, even for a working man. And that was my starting point, and my dream came alive, and I was driven to move back to those original ideas I had that, you know, we could possibly live much better and much healthier in a very, what we call today, a sustainable way. And the common sense of a design science, beginning with ethics, which everything has to begin with ethics, otherwise we can become, you know, we can easily become sociopathic. So beginning with ethics, a design science that gave us a methodology that allowed me to apply my practical approach to the world, allowed me to apply some of the knowledge I'd gained in history, living in an old historic country and traveling to other countries and cultures. It allowed me to apply my engineering type approach. My approach really is a very mechanical engineering approach, along with the love of the biology of Earth. So that was for me. It was a no-brainer at that stage. It was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I took the Permaculture Design Certificate course after a little bit of local engagement with a local permaculture group and an intro course on the Sunshine Coast. I travelled to Tasmania and took a course with Bill Mollison, the founder. And I left that course not realising how infected I was and how terminal that infection is. And then I learned later, after about 8 years of application of permaculture and trial and error and making lots of mistakes and in the early days, and applying it to my life and the land, the properties that I eventually bought and developed, I realised that I was terminally infected myself, and I could teach, and I tried teaching, and I was successful as a teacher, and I've continued to teach because there's a great demand for teachers, and I keep being asked to teach, and I feel obliged to teach because I tend to get a very good result. I've terminally infected thousands, possibly. That's what I want to do, because I just really like the idea of being able to teach people to be better than I am, to be better teachers, to be better designers, better consultants, and really to make me redundant. And I think I'm getting there. I can see my redundancy coming.
Now, you called it a sort of a design science. It's mechanical, but incorporating the field of ethics. Does that make it a bit of an art as well?
Well, art and science were always married in human knowledge and the transfer of human knowledge originally. Before we could read and write, before we had reading and writing, it was the arts that transferred knowledge. And they're very unforgettable because the universe is patterned by physical media receiving energetic events. So life forms are patterned in fractal patterns, dendritic patterns and flow patterns and harmonic patterns. There's many expressions of pattern form through the reception of energies. So that's what's all around us everywhere. When we try and remember something with song or dance or theatre or artwork or poetry, we're remembering the rhyme, we're remembering the story, and that's how we transferred information. That was information transfer as a system, and it's very unforgettable. That's why you can remember poetry, that's why you can remember song. So there's many facets of engaging the patterning system of nature, the patterning system of energy. And to be truly sustainable, we have to always make that link between the mechanical hard sciences, the provable sciences, and the arts. So art and science were once married together, and we separated the arts and we separated the sciences.
Well, part of the sort of the awakening that's happening throughout the globe is around the interdependence of life in general. You could look at that ecologically, or you could move to even quantum physics, or a spiritual discipline might describe it as well. So does permaculture capture the interdependence and interconnection of life?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're actually a very positive element, and the main intention is to make humanity, instead of the most damaging element on Earth, the most positive element on Earth. So by a consequence of our action, there would be more life diversity on Earth, there would be more speciation instead of extinction, there would be more soil creation instead of soil depletion. So we would be the stabilizing element by our actions, and now is the conscious time. So it is a proposed hypothesis that when we started to read and write and describe the universe around us with a written linguistic form, numbers and letters and words, we actually grew a very small, had a cortex on our brains, an extra layer. We branched out, our neural pathways branched out a little tiny bit. And I believe what we're experiencing now is that final coating on that final polish on our brains, which is the design mind, where we intentionally work with the universal patterns, the universal energies, to create the most positive event in the known universe, which is our true harmonic position. Where we are truly the kind of the passive manager, the submissive manager, the vice regent of Earth. A lot of religious texts talk about us being the guardians of Earth, or the caretakers of Earth, and we're obviously not. We're not fulfilling that role with the most destructive element. With the element, and this has to be the turning point. And what happens is, as we become wealthy, which is, if you define wealth as wealth being an abundance of clean air, an abundance of clean water, an abundance of clean food, an abundance of sensible housing that heats itself, cools itself, catches its own water, and has very low embodied energy that can be replaced with biological systems mostly. An abundance of community, warmth, community, and friendship. That would be true wealth. Now, if we redefine wealth from the convenience of money to true wealth, then we start to moderate our population as well, because there's a phenomenon called the biological effect, where a population is moderated when a species feels wealthy. So if you want to look at you know, the most infertile people in the world. It's where they think they're wealthy through money, or the lack of the need to work because they're subsidised with money. And if you want to find the most fertile people on earth, it's where they're in a war zone or where they're under incredible suffering. There's no infertility in those locations, and it's the same for all life forms. So if we really look at the edges of fertility, and in permaculture we like to look at the edges. The edge effect is something we talk about a lot. I talk about the edge thinking process. Think about the longest, the shortest, the oldest, the youngest, the biggest, the smallest. Think about the giants. Think about the gigantism and dwarfism is a study done by some famous biologists who looked at the gigantism and dwarfism that occurs on islands. It's very interesting because the area is not so important. It's the edge. So it's only on edges that you get accumulating surplus in nature. It's the edge effect where species look for edges to live on so they can harvest from 2 ecotones or 3 ecotones. Humanity always settles on the edge of a river, edge of the ocean, edge of the mountain to the plain. They always have the convenience of 2 environments, or at least 2, maybe 3, 4 environments to harvest from and manage. So it's edge thinking that will get us out of this, and edges define the patterning. So again, we come back to a pattern design system. So if you want to add one more word to ethical design science, it would be patterned or patterning, because that's what we have to do. And we have to repattern our behavior, and our approach to science has to start with ethics. So at the beginning of science has to start with ethics, and it has to end up in absolute abundance. You know, it's a wonderful era if we engage, and I think this internet we're talking through here could be one of the key factors that help us do it.
Well, you talked about repatterning, and that can be, I guess, translated into philosophy. You also talked about values and ethics, and you mentioned also an abundance of community. And the way that I read that, I translate that is an abundance of well-being and happiness, because when you've got a connection with people, a connection with nature, genuine sort of activity happening within your family, your friends, and love, then that changes everything. That is real wealth, as you mentioned. All right, so we'll get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of permaculture now. So it's a design science because it's tailored to suit each individual environment, the topography, that particular location. So for those who don't understand what permaculture is, what are some of the practices and the things that you would consider?
Well, you've mentioned one part of it there, which is where you actually design to a landscape. That landscape has also a climate relationship. So there are specific climates. There are major climates right down to minor climates of Earth. So design has to be applied to landscape plus the climatic effects. And the climate can be have microclimate effects locally. So landscape, which is called the orographic effect on climate. The orographic effect of climate also affects how you design to a landscape. So the very specific understanding of climate is involved, a specific understanding of the continuum of form of landscape, and then the clients, the people, the culture. There's specific cultures. So you're designing always around the needs of people. Now, we need to design in relation to efficiency. And efficiency is very high and specific when we're nearby. So we design in relation to zones. And the inner zones are what most people would, if they didn't understand what they were looking at, they would look at a permaculture design and say, oh, you have a home garden in the middle of a farm, if you are on a farm. If you're just on a suburban block, you have a very diverse home garden. Now, that's a very interesting thing. And you just talked about philosophy and feeling well-being. Well, people feel well when they can look outside and they can see an environment they understand and one that supplies your needs. And I don't mean just food. I mean, it supplies your medicine and your food and some of your fiber and some of your fuels if necessary, and a psychological place of well-being where you feel comfortable, not just when you look at it, but when you go and interact with it, when you go in there. Now, human gardens, that inner zone, do not exist in nature. All those elements in that zone are human dependent. They're completely human dependent. And if you stop maintaining that home garden, that inner zone of permaculture, it disappears. If it is not maintained, it disappears. It's a resource. If unmaintained, it disappears quite quickly and it becomes irrelevant. So every element on earth, every living element gardens its own environment in some ways. And we garden a very, very interesting specific garden. And in the last few hundred years, we've increased the diversity potential all over the earth of our home gardens by 800%. In other words, we've imported carrots from Afghanistan, where they originated, from white carrots to purple carrots. And it was a Dutch gardener that made the orange carrot to favour the Dutch royal family. One carrot made all those orange carrots. We speciated, we selected, we gardened. And we manage this inner zone, our natural habitat, actually. Now, from there, we can teach. From that zone, we can teach. When we move to our next zone out, which is much more vague, we start to partner with nature. And it's not totally human dependent there. And there we have food forests and mixed fruit tree systems. And we have to work with nature rather than mulching everything, have a hardware and mulchware and totally garden system. We have a system that's codependent on nature and wildlife. And the next zone out is more dependent on nature and wildlife. And the next zone out is more or less just forestry. And the furthest zone out is the wilderness, actual wilderness. Now here we're just a visitor, an observer. We have no right to change it, but there the biggest lessons are learned. The biggest university of knowledge is in the wilderness, and we will only ever be a very, very small part of that knowledge. We have to actually accept that. We can lose all the world's universities. We won't have lost very much. But we lose the wilderness, we've lost everything. Now, when you come back then into the zones of permaculture, the inner zone is then totally human dependent. Can you see it's like a vortex going in to out from our influence completely in a small area and very, very diverse, and releasing the management to a partnership with nature until it's all nature and we're just a visitor and observer. Now, you might have philosophers and poets and psychologists, all kinds of spoken academics that might not have knowledge that's necessarily applied, but you have the gardener poet, the farm philosopher, who's worked the land and worked with nature and has got a system that is getting richer, it's getting more diverse, it's got systems where the soil is getting more fertile and actually increasing in volume rather than depleting in erosion. And the landscape is getting more and more secure, and they're working from that inner garden that's totally human dependent out to those outer zones. You have a real philosopher. You have someone who really can teach you from that inner zone out what life and philosophy is really about. But without it, you might have a situation where information that isn't acted on is more or less useless. Philosophy that's not taken up is more or less useless. It's just spoken word. So I think there's a very interesting set of processes when we engage in the physical world of interdependence, where the world is dependent on us in that inner garden right the way out through the zones, whereas we're simply the visitor and observer. And the philosophy we gain between them is the real value. And when we pass that on for just the greater good of all people and not for financial gain, that philosophy is permanent. It goes on forever. It will be always remembered.
Yeah, society definitely has a strong disconnection through to nature through urbanisation and big city living and really not connecting with the food they eat and eating a lot of chemical laden and toxic foods and pills and whatnot. So there's definitely not just a philosophy, but a health aspect to re-engaging with how we connect with nature.
Yeah, most of us eat a maximum of about 8 varieties of vegetables, 2 staples and 3 animal products. That's often like the combination of human diet. You could easily eat 100 varieties of vegetables in a home garden if you wanted, and 50 varieties of fruit. You probably don't have to, but the more local it is, and in fact I like to say 0 food miles, so it's come out your home garden, 0 food time, so it's just been picked, with 0 food guilt, is the best diet you can have. Now, interestingly, we've documented with our free video series, geofflawton.com, gardens like Eric Tosmeyer's garden and Jonathan Bates' garden in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which gets 2 foot of snow for half the year. They have 200 varieties of vegetables in their garden, and they're specialized in perennials, not annuals. They have 200 varieties of perennial vegetables. Those vegetables that are not, they don't grow for a year, they grow for many years and come back up every year. This is after 2 foot of snow. Now, they started trialing 300 and they cut it back to the best 200. So there are people out there in permaculture from the tropics to the cold climate out to deserts and in every landscape now, they're doing these really fascinating physical representation of what's possible. And we've gone out of our way to document this stuff, along with ancient knowledge that's wonderful, married with appropriate technology of today, and I emphasize the word appropriate. When you apply all this to design and you realize that it's very meaningful, it's extremely engaging, and it kind of expands time. You have, when you have very meaningful events in your life, you remember them. Often trauma is well remembered, like pain and pleasure are anchored as Technicolor high definition slow motion, and any boring part of your life you don't really remember much because you sort of don't bother, and they're sort of black and white fuzzy memories. But anything that's meaningful is well remembered, and you don't own the future. It hasn't happened yet. This is the now. You and I are talking, so this is the event, and I find it quite meaningful talking. It's an interesting conversation. I'll probably remember it. But if you look back, what you remember you've done are the meaningful events or the dramatic events. Now, when you engage in permaculture, because it's so all engaging, you just get consumed by it. It's just wonderful. It's like this. It's this wonderful knowledge. It doesn't matter that you're not academic, because you are so interested in it. You have an improved mental capacity. I'm sure if we studied the brains of permaculture practitioners, you'd find they would be growing larger neural pathways because they're engaging. I didn't know one Latin name in 1983 when I took my permaculture course. I probably know 500 plus Latin names because and they're all interesting names. They're all practical names. They're not all roses or orchids, you know. they're useful plants. I have a story for each one. And because I love it, it's great, and I share it with other people. Now, when I look back on my memories, they're massive. A year is huge. I mean, I can't. If I look back on 5 years, it's a number of books. If I wanted to write it all down, and 10 years is a lifetime. So it feels like the meaningful, interesting, intense engagement that you get involved in that's very relative to you and your health and your psychology and your physical health expands time. Now, wow, if you could bottle that up and sell it as a product, it would be a bestseller. So that's what this is. I mean, it has great purpose. And you know, with our online course, I get a lot of endorsements, and people say that just like it's embarrassing almost, the endorsements that people are giving us. You've changed my life. You know, this has given me total meaning. You know, this has put so much knowledge together that I've already got in a format I can now engage in. You know, I feel like there's hope. is a big statement. I feel like at last there's hope. I mean, it's kind of, people say they play my videos when they're feeling depressed. It gives them hope. It's a great thing to be giving people through a screen. The more of it, the better. That's all I can say. It's a good thing. I think the other thing is, you know, so many things fit into permaculture. People talk about, you know, they might ask me, how does organic gardening fit into permaculture? How does biodynamics fit into permaculture? You know, how does, you know, the soil food web fit into permaculture? How does alternative building, renewable energy, you know, biological waste systems, all these subjects, and different schools that teach it, they all fit. They all fit into permaculture. Permaculture is all inclusive of elements that are ethical and give us a good tool to include in our toolkit. But the way I like to describe it is they're like coat hangers in a wardrobe. Like my organic gardening coat is like one of my favorite coats. I put it on a cold morning and go out into the garden. It's not the best coat I wear, but it's a nice coat and I like it. I feel comfortable and it keeps me warm when I'm gardening. It hangs in my wardrobe on a coat hanger. Now, my best dress suit, when I've got to do the corporate presentations in there as well, it's at the other end of the wardrobe. And I've got many, many things in my wardrobe because I have many things I have to do in my life. And I have a shelf at the top for my hats and a drawer at the bottom for my underpants and socks. You know, it's got all kinds of things in my wardrobe. I've got a mirror either on the inside or the outside so I can see what I look like when I'm dressed up. Does it all work? We don't design coat hangers. They're all often things we've included. We design the wardrobe that hangs together all that knowledge in a usable form that makes sense. That when you get dressed up with that knowledge, it fits together. It's a connecting system between disciplines. So you check that what you're wearing suits because it has connectivity. So permaculture is a connecting system between many disciplines that puts it in a format that's incredibly valuable to get us out of the problems we're in so many ways. You know, the environment, the people, the social order. We will never have good social order until we design our way out of this problem ourselves. No one's coming to help us. We're going to have to do this ourselves, together, everybody.
Excellent. So you talked about the getting your hands dirty. What ways do you get your hands dirty in permaculture? Which ways do you actually really connect with nature through that process? And as an additional question, how do animals fit into the permaculture culture?
Well, all of us engage some way in physical work usually, and most of us agree at least to do a little bit of gardening. Even if it's on a balcony. One of my students in Sydney, Australia, has a 20 square metre balcony and produces 60 kilos of food every year, 60 to 70 kilos of food every year off a balcony. You know, that's an incredible production per square metre. Most of it's potted plants or container plants. And then other people, you know, we have people here at our institute, they mostly work on renewable energy, but they also do a bit in the garden now and again. I think putting your hands in the soil a bit and engaging yourself with living elements that are of value actually sort of clears your mind. It discharges your energy a certain amount. You need some involvement in the natural world. So, but there are many specialist fields. I mean, some people specialise in different elements, practical elements. I've done a lot of earth moving, directing of earth moving to build water harvesting systems and ponds and dams and swales and, you know, the larger physical work. And I'm mostly directing it, but I'm out there on the ground. I think it's at least an understanding of all those biological elements, even if you're a permaculture builder. The wall behind me is straw bale. It's actually rice straw in this one. I have rice straw, wheat straw, sugarcane straw, and bamboo straw in this building structures around here, and then others. But, you know, people are involved in different things, but mostly they have some understanding of the life systems. Animals are a natural part of this planet, and their cycles of nutrient are very important to the planet's health. And if you want to work without animals, you have to exploit a much larger area of land to actually bring in the nitrogen harvesting crops. And even then, you're going to have wildlife. Now, I've done systems for raw fooders. I've designed systems for raw food people. I've done systems for frugarians, raw food and fruit, vegans and vegetarians, and of course, people who are also meat eaters. There's a lot of misquoting of the Trophic Pyramid, as if humanity sits at the top, and below is vegetation, and below that's insects, and below that's fish, and below that's animals, or whatever, or the other way around. When animals are growing, they're putting on weight. But when they stop growing, they don't carry their food around in a bag after they've processed it. They poop it onto the ground. There's a lot of quotes out there about how much water the domestic animals consume, but it doesn't stay with them like us. They pee it out as an improved liquid called urine, which in a natural world goes to the ground and grows more plants and insects and frogs and fish and other things. But there's a whole section of cycles in a natural system. It's not a top-down pyramid. It's very convenient to look at it that way, but it's nothing like that. And I understand, I totally understand. There's a lot of sensitivity about animals, and we've totally been, desensitized and sensitized at the same time around, the consumption of animals, because we see so many factory animal systems. But the truth is that if you want to not use animals in a system, you are going to eventually have to move nutrients from one part of the planet to the other part of the planet to keep one part more fertile, and you're going to displace a lot of wildlife doing that. You've got to simplify one area of land to a carbon crop to bring it to another piece of land. So I'm very careful what I say here, because I know there's a lot of sensitivities about this subject, and I experience it a lot on the ground here, because we actually have acreage. We have 66 acres, 27 hectares here, that we've set up as a demonstration site for people to experience how it is on a fully diverse system. And I'm willing to be very, very, very sensitive and careful about how I explain that to people, because you have to be. Most people that are in cities where there is there are very few domestic animal systems that are close by and in a natural designed setup. People want to get away from this factory atrocity that happens, where our systems have they can be with or without animals, but however you do it, you have to understand the energy that you put in to the energy that you take out. We do a lot of energy auditing. So a sustainable system produces more energy than it consumes over its lifetime, enough at a minimum to maintain and replace itself, or maintain and replace its component parts over their lifetimes. That is sustainable, and nothing else is sustainable. Now, that is a minimum criteria for sustainability. Let me say it again. So a sustainable system produces more energy than it consumes over its lifetime, enough to maintain and replace itself. Now, that means you've got no surplus whatsoever. You've got nothing to trade, nothing to sell, nothing to share. You've got to produce more energy than needed to maintain and replace itself over its lifetime, to have anything extra. So that's what you have to always keep in mind. And to do that by design, you don't just have to think about energy. You have to think about entropy and the entropic loss. Now, entropy is the contained energy in a system or an element once it's gone. So you have to extend the energy capture within the system. You have to extend the time of entropic loss in the system. So when we teach permaculture, we teach a lot about energy and how living systems, although science wouldn't agree to this, but I understand you have Rupert Sheldrake as one of your guests later, and Rupert would be interested to ask him about entropy in living systems, because entropy is about energy. In the science model, it doesn't involve life, but you and I have energy, and everybody listening to this has energy. So somehow we are capturing energy. We are an entropic end for all the food we consume and pass through us, all the life forms that we eat and pass through us, and their energy came from the sun. So it's a matter of extending the sun's capturing the sun's energy in ecosystemic type processes that are beneficial to us and the environment and all life on Earth. Now that's the human challenge of this moment and the next century. And we probably haven't got a century to pull it off. But that's it in a nutshell. How do we design, and I'm saying design, ecosystems that provide all our needs, benefit all life on Earth, capturing the sun's energy and extending it over time to the best possible efficiency? And nothing does it better than ecosystems. It's been done for millennia by the forests and the ecosystems of Earth. Ecosystems major in trees mostly, the large woody elements. So trees are majorly missing out of our agricultural landscape. And not just trees, but diversity of ecosystem assemblies of trees. And it's interesting that the early alternative hippie movement were all tree hugging, wanting to save the trees. And the trees were the sort of thing that we were looking at, the ancient elements, the large elements in the ecosystem. But to define it mechanically and like get to the mechanics of this thing, how does it work? What are we actually trying to do? That's why we anchored on trees, I believe. But it's not just trees, it's whole ecosystem assemblies. And we're the new indigenous people of Earth. We're the new, we're the new team, we're the new nation of indigenous designers of this planet. We've got to do it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And a theme that I keep hearing is that this design science is based on ethics. So when you look at incorporating animals into designing a permaculture plot, obviously it's going to be with a deep respect of life as well. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. It doesn't fit into the model. But yeah, so when you talk about natural systems and utilizing them in an efficient way, you're talking about capturing energy through the sun, capturing the water in the right way and distributing it in the most efficient way, utilizing specific types of plants for specific types of roles, such as through companion planting. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, as you get more and more involved, you realise that you're not just looking at the human energy efficiency going out from the inside with zones that fit to the landscape, but also there's climatic factors of wind and water coming through, flood and frost and temperature. So these are elements that you either want to invite in or you want to block out. So first there's zones, and then there's the energies that are already on a site going through, and then there's the then there's how you designed a slope, because you've got different angles of slope that make it less stable. So as you get into steeper slopes, very difficult to maintain stability. So you go into more of a permanent ecosystem and a treed ecosystem. And then you come down to the finer zones where your zone shapes are going to go into the more friendly slopes and a variation of location. So when you go into a site, one of the first things you look at is water, because water often is the main limiting factor of a system. You've got to trap water, so you look for possibilities of water, possibilities of access. How do you get around a site? How do you get through a site? How do you enter a site initially? How do you block fire with entry at the bottom? How do you hold water with entry at the top or deliveries at the top? Because it's much easier to roll them downhill. Gravity is very constant. And then where do you place your structures? And then when you get through all that, it's very thoughtful, you start to then assemble elements that work well together. Now, some elements help each other, so you get a positive relationship. And then you get elements have no effect on other elements. They're neutral. So you get a positive no effect or a no effect positive possibility. And then you get negative elements. And if you're talking plants, you could say they're allelopathic. Other things don't like to grow up near them. So you get a negative negative, a negative no effect, or a negative positive combination. So if you've got 3 elements, negative, positive, no effect, you've only got 9 computations of how they could go together. So then we start to find gilding, where you can get a positive, positive, and another positive, and a no effect combination. Now you might find there's a negative that you want, and how do we fit it in? It might be a negative that has a yield that we want, but other elements don't like it. So we might put a negative with a no effect on either side and a positive either side of that. Or you might have 2 elements that are negative to each other, and we want both their products, but we can't put them next to each other, but we can put a neutral in the middle. So we start to assemble gildings. There are combinations like, you know, an apple and a walnut don't like to grow next to each other as 2 fruit trees, but a mulberry has a neutral effect on both of them. So you tend to put a walnut, a mulberry, and an apple, another mulberry, and then a walnut. That's just a simple assembly. And then you find different beneficial effects between one element and another. And it's not just plants, it's also animals. So chickens following cows spread the manure and break pest cycles. You can actually go horses, goats, cows, chickens, you know, and they all benefit the pasture, and they all harvest a different section of a pasture. You get assemblies of birds going through a forest, all cooperating. You get a canopy harvester and an understory harvester and a trunk harvester and a ground bird moving through a forest, all different species, as a wave of disturbance, disturbing insects and disturbing the forest, but they're completely different species of bird. And the canopy harvester will often be the alarm call if there's a hawk. Alarm call for the rest. So it's cooperative gilding the species. Now we look for those in domestic species too. So you'll find things that grow together often eat together, like potatoes and peas. Potatoes and peas actually grow together. Tomatoes and lettuce grow together. Tomatoes, lettuce, and basil grow together. Tomatoes, lettuce, basil, and nasturtium grow together. And things like fennel happen to, they've got an umbelliferae flower, and they attract predatory moths. They attract predatory wasps. Now, the predatory wasps often break pest cycles, but the fennel also has a beneficial effect on the root zone of the apple trees. Now, if you find people who've grown up on old traditional farms, they'll often say that apples often used to taste a little bit aniseedy because there was a root exudate from the fennel that got into the apple roots that gave the apple a little bit of a fennel flavour. Now, we're assembling new species together as well because we're still combining species that we haven't used before. I grow all kinds of crops you may not have heard of, like arecacia and yacon, you know, taro and cassava, you know, and new fruit trees. So it's still a wonderful journey of exploration. And students have come to me and said, we've found out that, you know, dogbane as a herb, which is an unusual little sort of semi-succulent, smelly herb, seems to make citrus trees grow better. We don't know why. We tried it. A lot of people tried it. They all agreed, yes, we don't know why, but it seems to work, that young citrus trees, oranges, lemons, mandarins, seem to grow better with dogbane around them. Hey, until we all start working on these wonderful assemblies and combinations, they don't become a constant within our community. Then we need a community action to share it. Now, here's the way we make family. This is how we make community. We start to realize that we have many, many jobs in our community that link to the primary production of our needs, the processing of our primary production, how we then process it, the services that we service each other with, and the arts. like the arts and the poetry and the psychology and everything else, that's philosophy. So when we make that combination in relation to our bioregion, our local area, we re-identify who we are. This is our personality. This is our identity. This is our fingerprint. This is we, the people of the land of the people. You know, this is who we are. This is not some corporate soft drink we're going to buy in the shop and 2 purchases later there's 2% of that money left in the local environment. This is our stuff. This is what we are known for in this region. So when you make a recipe book, for goodness sake, make sure you make a recipe book that has a name and a place and a month of the year on it. I want the name of the place, right? And January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, or December, because that's the recipe book that you can grow all the ingredients locally and you can buy it from the local bioregion. And that's a real recipe book. And when people realize that that identifies who we are, at least by our food, we start to put the rest of it together. You know, and this is what the kids should know. There should be standard education globally. And we feel like global citizens then who can actually act locally when we're thinking globally. By thinking globally, we act locally. You know, and permaculture teaches you to do that worldwide. That's your criteria of action as you go in as a designer.
You've represented perfectly how permaculture as a design science there, how everything interrelates. Some things don't. What can you use to increase the yield or to increase the actual, I guess, the relationships that are happening around you in the environment. So that shows exactly what what type of design science permaculture actually is. And you also talked about community, and that was that's going to lead into my next question actually. Because permaculture plots are usually considered as something that are done for the individual on either their plot of land, their farmland, or within their urban landscape, so a backyard in the city or whatnot. But have permaculture plots been designed in a way that are communal in a community setting?
They have, yeah. And they've been applied to communities that are already quite functional in some places in the world. Usually that's the undeveloped world. But in the overdeveloped world, it's difficult to get us back into community because we're all about, our lifetime's investment in relation to landscape. But where we look at traditional community, there's a lot of shared work. There's a lot of shared purpose. And there's often community forestry that we agree to work on, and then we get free building materials at marriage. And often marriage is a lifetime event and not a temporary event like it's become in the overdeveloped world. We can't really have a stable world until we have very stable relationships. And I think working into a stable relationship with the environment, which I feel very much, and a lot of long-term permaculture people who have been successful on the land feel it too. I feel like I have a very caring and sharing relationship with the environment I live in, and it's a very a deep relationship. It's a strong relationship, and I don't think it'll ever let me down, and I won't ever let it down. And we build that with our life partners and our local environment and our local community. Now then we share that in action, and we do that usually in our outer zones, and we share it with information and knowledge that's valuable to the event. So there are more and more villages being designed, and there's more and more inquiry to put this together as a village system. I've set up quite a few permaculture groups that are local community groups where more than 100 people meet once a month for many years. The oldest one's over 20 years, 25 years old this year, I think. Now, that builds a community where you can go to that group if you've been involved, and you can look at those 100+ people and more new people coming, and you've done a few things with them. You've shared a few experiences. You've gone out on perma blitzes where you've put a garden in one day for someone to get the experience and as a learning exercise. You've done physical work with people. You've engaged in what they've been involved in or what they've helped you with. And you can look at those people and think, my goodness, I love all those people. They're wonderful, but I couldn't live with 95% of them. So what that means is the 5% are the 1 in 20 in that room that you could live with very closely. In other words, you could be in a farming hamlet, or they're more or less what you call extended family. Now, everybody else might be fine to live in your village, but you've got to know who your extended family are. And we've got to be able to re-identify our extended family. Because they're not your family, but your extended family, who you go through thick and thin with. You can love everybody in the village. They're all great, and they're all really diverse, and they do loads of different things, and people very different to you. And that's fine. But it's how do you sort of re-tribalize, and that's a trendy sort of word, but anyway, how do you find who your extended family are? Because we're very, very disconnected. That the more civilized or developed we are and economically affluent, the less we want to know our neighbours. We don't even want to know who our neighbours are in most cities. Where if you live in a traditional village, you know everybody in the whole village. You know who they are. Right? So there's an interesting process where you have to go through in setting up community groups which share the knowledge. And when I identified that, the knowledge is really happy little accidents and sad little failures that we share while we're trying to work out how we can do this design system locally in all our buildings and all our waste systems and all our energy systems, in all our transport systems, as well as our growing systems and our living systems. It's not just gardening. Most people are very shocked that permaculture is so much more than gardening. And Bill Mollison, the founder, often stated that, you know, it's a revolution disguised as gardening, which is a nice quote. So, when we share all the knowledge together, we learn to sort of tolerate and trust each other. It's as much as it's being tolerant and trusting that we're all generally going in the same direction. And we don't have to like everybody. But we can love their good intentions without really liking them. And then we find out the people that we can tolerate through anything. And then we have a chance of community again. And we can do cooperative action, like community forestry. A lot of traditional systems had 1 day a month that every adult had to agree to work in the community forest. And then all young couples at marriage could build a house with materials out of the forest without exploiting that forest. Free building materials, I mean, that's a whole different idea. I mean, it's been done before. Most people today spend a lifetime of debt never paying their house off. And the house doesn't even last a lifetime, so it's kind of crazy. I mean, how do we get there? I've been lucky enough to live in some houses that have been hundreds of years old, passed on from generation to generation, and they often perform better than the modern house in many, many ways. It's a lot has been done before, and new combinations have been done for the first time. But now this is intended design, and that's a bit different. It's designed with total intention of a result.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of action really needs to be a grassroots operation. We can see that it's not happening from the policy point of view. The politicians are not engaged in thinking about how we can move away from multinational food distribution and manufacture. I mean, ideally, I'd love to see food grown in the street. I'd love to see people decentralised from these urbanised environments and food be available in an abundant way. Just you walk in the street and there's an orange and go pick it and have your morning tea. That would be the ideal for me one day. So personally, I'd like to see that in my lifetime. But who knows? It really does come down to the local organisation and goals that are developed at that level. Now, I wanted to talk about permaculture has been known to be applicable in basically all climates and all environments. So can you tell us a bit about, in some of the most extreme areas, permaculture has been successful in growing food and resource systems?
Yeah, sure. I've been lucky enough to work in areas of the Amazon with over 5 meters of rain, where we've applied permaculture to modern development and traditional systems, traditional villages. I've actually worked for the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, teaching courses, and there's a huge movement over there. And I've gone right out to some of the driest environments on earth. We have projects in Jordan, in the Dead Sea Valley, and we have a very successful project there that's being extended through not only Jordan, but also through surrounding countries. I've worked in northern Iraq, rebuilt a village there in 2003. We have projects in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Extreme climates. Jordan and the Dead Sea Valley has 150 mil of rain a year, 6 inches. But we've gone right down to 3 inches in Saudi Arabia. So we've worked right from the middle of cities out to the extremes of climate. There's a course being taught as we are speaking right now in Alaska, and there's an Alaskan permaculture movement of people working in Alaska. Right, it's getting pretty cold. Canada's big. It's a big movement in Canada. And I have films of urban garden in Canada, in Calgary. The largest community glass house, solar heated glass house in Vermeer in Canada, which traps residual heat for 6 months of the year in the floor and extends its season. So, you know, from the coldest to the driest to some of the wettest, from the equatorial zones out to Alaska. If everybody wants to see where permaculture is, they can look at permacultureglobal.org, which has a Google Maps and Google Earth interface with pins all across the world of where people are operating and where projects are operating, and we're on all the extremities. But the systems obviously changes as we go across climates and landscape specifics. I think the dry deserts are my biggest extreme that I've worked in now. Recently I was in Togo in West Africa, working for aid organisations, designing orphanages, permaculture orphanages. I have a lot of interaction with aid organisations who want to put in orphanage schools with medical centres, traditional herbal medical, alternative medical, as well as conventional medical, with schools and full permaculture gardens, to not only support the orphans but also train the orphans to extend permaculture as a system for their situation. So, you know, hopefully we can make orphanages more and more redundant, and give the orphans a meaningful career. We've had recently we've had prisoners take the permaculture course online, and with prison authorities want to know whether we would be interested in extending it through prisons as an online teaching method, which might reduce the crime rate, which would be great. If so it's a way for people who in prison for a crime come out and change their lifestyle and do something meaningful for community. So we're really stretching now. I've worked on another extreme environment I've worked on is I was a consultant for the landscape architectural team that asked me to be involved, and they won the contract for Masdar City, which is a $22 billion project in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, where they're building a carbon neutral city. So that was at the top end of consultancy, where we're dealing with, about as an advanced system, an advanced corporate funded situation you could ever imagine. Whole city built from scratch, carbon neutral. So we've gone from the corporate boardrooms, right to the war zones, and there really isn't anywhere now that permaculture doesn't stretch. In an informal way, we're the world's largest applied aid organisation. We have more people on the ground than the United Nations by far, and way more projects. But we're not centralised on purpose. We're decentralised. We're a very wild system. We produce our own teachers and activate people into real action. And nobody's really seen us coming over the last, since 1979, the system's been taught, and we've only produced our own teachers from our own courses. So we breed in our own teachers, and there's thousands of courses being taught every second and increasing. So it's hopefully it's exponentially in time, but I don't think anybody's really realised the size of our system, which is good, which is really good.
All right, so to wrap up, permaculture is a design science based in ethics. It's not just about gardening. Producing food is a big component of it, but it's also about how humans interrelate with the environment and each other, and it incorporates many of the disciplines and the technologies that aim to help build a sustainable, abundant, and caring model for within the environment and within each community. It can be done anywhere around the world, any climates, any temperatures. Each plot needs to be designed according to the natural systems and other factors of that particular place. But essentially, with the right type of knowledge and skill, it can be achieved no matter where you are in the world. If people want to learn more about it, they can go to permaculturenews.org. And they can, because permaculture is very widespread all around the world, including South America and many places. Is there anything else that you think might be relevant to add?
No, I mean, people find it easy to watch videos. So on my free video channel, geofflawton.com, they get to sit through, there's 35 free videos and increasing at a regular rate of about one every 2 weeks, new one included. And they're only 10 minutes, but they're very inspiring. So have a look at that and you get an idea of what's possible.
Excellent. Well, very much appreciating you joining us on this journey for the Redesigning Society series, Geoff.
My pleasure.